All right, so at this time, it is a pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Sister Norma Pimentel. A sister with the Missionaries of Jesus, Sister Norma is Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley. She oversees the charitable arm of the Diocese of Brownsville, providing oversight of different ministries and services in the Rio Grande Valley, located along the U.S.-Mexico border, through emergency assistance, homelessness prevention, disaster relief, clinical counseling, pregnancy care, food programs, and the Humanitarian Respite Center. Sister Norma's work is one of immediate response to the emerging needs in the community. Her humanitarian work on the U.S.-Mexico border, overseeing the provision of a safe space for migrants to rest and regain strength, has been recognized by many organizations across the country. She was named to the 2020 Time 100 list of the most influential people in the world. Sister Norma received a bachelor's degree in fine arts from Pan American University, a master's degree in theology from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, and a master's degree in counseling psychology from Loyola University in Chicago, Illinois. She will be speaking on the importance of working together to ensure all human life is respected. Sister Norma will share how Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley has responded to the humanitarian crisis in the southern border and has inspired the community to work together to serve the most vulnerable and restore human dignity. It is my pleasure and an honor to welcome today Sister Norma Pimentel.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here among you all and for you to want to hear what I have to say. As the prayer this morning was done so nicely, San Lorenzo sort of reminds me of a lot of how I got started, at least put me in touch with the reality, and I've shared this many times when I speak. This experience that I had right when, very close to the time I entered religious life, and I was under the direction of my teacher and mentor, Sister Juliana. She was an amazing woman, religious woman. She came from Spain, and quite a person to represent the church. She was very clear in her understanding of who she was and what her role was as a religious in the world, in the church. And she certainly passed that on to me. And the way she did this, is back in at the beginning when we started our community, Missionaries of Jesus. When I entered the Missionaries of Jesus, the sisters were already receiving to their convent, because Border Patrol at that time did not have a detention facility for women and children, and so they would call Sister Juliana, and they would take these families, mothers and children that could not be where the men were, and so she would always say yes, they could come over and stay in the convent. So right from the start, when I entered religious life, I was introduced to immigrants in my life. It was part of our community to have a mother and a child always in our house. And soon enough, after I entered, our local bishop, Bishop Fitzpatrick, John Fitzpatrick, is a bishop from Buffalo, New York. He was my very first bishop. He entrusted a shelter for refugees. At the time, it was named Casa Oscar Romero. During the time it was happening in El Salvador, and we all remember the sisters that were killed and the Jesuits, and during that time when they also assassinated Archbishop Oscar Romero, who now is a saint. And during that time, we the diocese opened a shelter to receive the thousands and thousands of immigrants that were coming from El Salvador and also other countries to the United States. And we actually were witnessing the atrocities that the war was doing to the many refugees that were coming to the border. That was my introduction to life, you know. And so I was really very young, must have been maybe 25 by the time when we were at that house, this shelter. And I had a great heart, a great desire to help others, you know, as part of what I had said when I decided to join the religious life and say yes, you know. And what that all meant, I wasn't quite sure I understood it 100% at that time. I just knew that this sounds kind of funny, right? The mic is good. Okay, I feel like I lose some of my words, but in any case, back then I would hear the atrocities of the families and the men that were arriving to our house during the day or the night, you know, in very terrible conditions. You know, they were all wet and muddy already because they had just crossed the river. They hadn't been detained or stopped by immigration back then. It was not as how it is today. But, you know, people basically crossed the river, and by the time they found themselves en route to our house, because they would always try to get somewhere, and they would say, go to Casa Romero, they'll help you there, you know. And so we would get a lot of people. And I would hear the stories of how they were tortured by the military and what was happening in El Salvador. And so one day, we were going for lunch, Juliana and myself, and she said, Norma, on our lunch hour where we were going to lunch, she said, let's stop at the congressman's office and go ahead and support these people that are speaking up in defense of the Salvadorans, you know, the people from El Salvador that are facing the war. And the United States is actually sending $1 million every single day to support with military arms for that war. Does anybody remember those times? Well, you can understand back then, you know, I didn't understand nada. I was completely unaware of what was happening, but Juliana did. And she said, let's stop and support these people, because in every single congressman's office, people are questioning, why are you in favor of you know, sending this money to El Salvador? And Juliana said, we know, Norma, what that money is costing. You know, we know exactly the families. And I can tell you one story of young men sitting with me one evening as we waited for people to go to bed and go to sleep, and he showed me his hands, and every single nail in his hand he did not have anymore. They had tortured him and pulled one after another, and he was young, he must have been like 23 years old, and he showed me his hands, and that was just one story of many that I would hear often. So I understood what Juliana meant by let's go support this group questioning the congressman. We were just going to go set up and say, you know, we're here to support and we believe in what you're doing. And these people were going to go do civil disobedience. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, you know. But they were going to do it at the end of the day at 5 o'clock when the office was supposed to close. And they were going to say, no, we're not leaving, arrest us, you know. And so what happened was that at noon when we arrived, the manager of the building was very upset that this group was there. And so he called the cops, you know, he called the police, and they arrived when we arrived, you know. So what was supposed to happen at 5 actually happened at noon when we were there, you know. And so they started to arrest everybody. And it was like, okay. And Sister Juliana turns and looks at me and she says, Norma, when we say we believe in something and then we run away because things get tough, then we don't really stand for anything. You know, we're nobody. So we both can get arrested because somebody has to take care of the family at the shelter. You decide. So I was very young, and she was in her late 40s, 50s, you know? I said, I guess it's me, right? And she says, okay, bye. And she leaves me right there, you know? And I go like, okay. And I was there faced with this group of people dragged out of there, okay? Boy, was that an eye-opener for me, you know? I was faced with myself saying yes. Talk about saying yes to religious life, okay? All of a sudden, it became so real for me what it meant to say yes when I enter religious life, when I say yes to God, you know? I'm thinking of St. Lorenzo. I'm sure that he must have felt similar to that commitment, that conviction, that reality that I'm saying yes to God for a reason, you know? Because he matters, right? For whatever reason, Lorenzo thought that, you know, saying, I can't say no to my faith, to who I am. Well, I was faced with something similar in that moment when they were going to arrest me. And I had to face up with the reality that who I was, what I stand for, why life matters, the life of these people that I was seeing daily arrive day and night in conditions that were terrible. The whole family. And I knew that there was something wrong. Why people have to flee from their lives, scared, frightened, because their life was in danger. And they had to just go. I was very young, but that first step in my life helped me understand why it is that I'm here today. Why God has chosen to help me be a voice, to speak up for them, for these people that continue to come, not just from El Salvador, but for so many other countries. And we have right now the greatest number of people on the move, leaving from their countries, traveling from very far, going through so much pain and suffering, encountering so many difficulties and people who have no respect to human life. One after another, always trying to see how to protect themselves from those predators. The stories I hear daily of so many people that you look in their face and they share with you how difficult it was to travel. You know, just recently I remember this young man was at our center in McAllen. And I don't go that often anymore. You know, I have a lot of people that are actually doing the amazing work there at our center, but I do show up because I want to see the families. I want to have an opportunity to talk to them when I have a chance. What I do mostly is go across to Mexico, because there's where thousands of them are that the United States is refusing to let them in. So I see this young man, and he says, he had brand new pair of tennis shoes, and he just arrived. And the coordinator that I have there at the center, Rosa, I asked her, she said, "Sister, ask him his story." I said, "Tell me, what is your story?" And he said, "Well, when I crossed into the United States, Border Patrol apprehended me and my wife and my little boy. And my feet were completely I didn't have any shoes on, because I didn't have shoes. I lost my shoes along the way. And my feet were swollen to the point that they were bleeding with blisters. And they were in terrible condition. And the officer that apprehended me, he was really, truly moved by looking at my feet in such terrible condition, because he asked me, ¿Por qué? How come your feet are like that? And I told him, we have been walking for days. And he started to cry, the officer. And he was moved and said to him, I'm going to get you a pair of brand new tennis shoes. So that's why he had those tennis shoes on. You know, it is every person who encounters another human being in conditions that are beyond us understanding why. Why does a human person have to suffer as they do? Why do they have to flee from their countries in the first place? And we in the United States question, why do they have to come to the United States? When is enough enough? When do we have to say, that's it, you know? No more. Are we supposed to help everybody? You know, the United States is truly blessed. But with that blessing comes great responsibility. I've asked a lot in groups that I taught questions like that. And I say, why limit the grace of God? You know, when I have a room in my shelter, we've gotten up to 2,000 people daily. And that is not this year, that was during Trump's years. 2,000. Can you imagine 2,000 people every single day? There was no room for them to, we, thank God, only kept them within 24 hours or less. So every day was another 2,000 and another 2,000. There's no way you could ever have 1,000, 2,000 toothbrushes, much less everything else. Imagine. It's never enough. And yet, in the evenings when some of them have to spend the night because their bus or their way to continue their journey was not until the next day, they would spend the night, and all our floor becomes a sleeping area. We clean it up, pick up all the chairs and tables, and lay mats. And it's packed. No space to put anybody else. And yet, when I have a family arriving at 11 at night, sometimes I would go to say good night and pray with them at the end of the day. And I see a family just walking in, being brought to us. And I truly look at the hall, and it's packed, filled, no room. And yet the families that are inside, resting already asleep, says, there's room right here, sister. They open up and make space for them. They're the best example of welcoming and saying, we understand what this family who just arrived has just gone through. There is space here. You know, one time I remember that sometime in the beginning when we were doing receiving these families, we tried to monitor, control more or less how much we gave of Pampers or milk for the families, you know, because to have enough. So we have enough for all the mothers or everybody asking. And some of the volunteers would come up to me and say, sister, this mother is asking for more Pampers. And we already gave her 5. I don't know that we can give her because we have it set up so that we can reach as many mothers as possible. So I decided, you know what? Let's not put how many they can have. If they need something, you give it to them. If we have it, we have it. If we don't, we don't, you know? And so that was the decision we all came to and decided that that's how it was going to be. Well, ever since we decided that, we have never run out of Pampers, you know? Never. Always have Pampers. Yes, we have to clap because that's the grace of God. You know, sometimes we think we have to limit ourselves and be worried about tomorrow. I think that job belongs to God, right? He decides what we must do. So to answer the question about how many is enough, I think we have to let decision be done by God, right? To let us know what exactly it is that we must do. Because the truth is that I find it hard to understand myself when I cross over to Mexico in Reynosa now, right across from where I am. And I go very often every week, trying to see how I can help them over on the other side. Because there are, for example, I work a lot with the pastors of evangelical churches, who are the ones that are actually stepping up and doing something to help the thousands of people that are there. Thousands of them. Honestly, right now we have mostly Haitians. I would say, for sure, no less than 10,000 in one city, homeless. Think about how to feed and how to, just water. Water is the only thing that sometimes I give them what I can to be able to buy water for a week, for so many of them. And you say, and with the hot sun and the days so terribly difficult for them, why should we ration water? And sometimes the people say, no, don't fill up your container, just a little bit container, not a big container. And you tell that to a mother, that for the whole day, she can only have a little container of water when they have to be under the sun all day long? How important water is. Don't talk about anything else. It's just think about our lives. And I always think of myself when I travel, that every time I take less and less, that we don't need very much. We here in the United States are truly blessed. And so I believe that we must find ways to say yes, to be willing to stand up and be arrested, to be willing to say yes to whatever it takes to make a difference in what is happening today. Because today things are not that good. We all know how difficult it's becoming with the fact that life is not respected. The disrespect to human life is almost as if it becomes not important. What is more important is my political gain. So much so that people now entering the United States are used, as many have said, in response to the buses that are being taken to cities without notifying them or even letting them know where they're taking them. Political pawns. And almost as if it doesn't matter if a school is gunned down, because having arms, it seems to be something that goes against our rights, you know? So I see so many things occurring today in our life, in our society, in our world. And what are we doing about it? What is our response to everything that is happening in our own society, in our own city, in our own country, or in the world? What are we doing? Is there anything that I must do? I think that we all have a responsibility at every level a responsibility to God to say, yes, sir, yes, God, what is it that I must do? Because what we do matters. Who you are matters. So we must, as religious life, I think that's why we're here today, right? Religious life matters. I think that is something that we have always sort of questioned ourselves today. What is religious life today? And how it's changing. And some of us sort of struggle with the idea, where is religious life going? Because we don't see those great numbers of young girls or young men entering religious life as they were some years back. But I think that God has a plan. And He has us here for a reason. Still, religious life matters. And we're making a difference by responding to what is happening today in life. We are not just sitting back and saying, and staying at the chapel and praying. We're going out to say yes to what is happening and doing something about it. We're coming together like you all are coming together today to try to understand what our role is and what else must we do to make a difference in the life of those that matter. Those that don't have a voice, those that need to have a voice, and we can be that bridge for them, that connection. And it starts and moves from the understanding that all life matters, because all life is sacred. And how we approach this is important. I think one of the things that I have done myself is to always keep myself focused and centered in humanity, in that reality, in being for life, how to respect life, and not keep ourselves away, push ourselves away from the fact that many of them want to make this political. But it's never about politics for us. It's always about the person. And when it's about the person, then we are able to help everybody come together as one. Back where I come from, when I got started with our response to the humanitarian crisis at the border, many families were arriving, and the Border Patrol was overwhelmed with so many people that they were apprehending and processing, but mostly children. They were apprehending children, and they didn't know what to do with so many kids. They were classified as unaccompanied children, meaning that they were coming with somebody else other than their immediate parents. So the United States had a policy in place that any child that came with other than their parents needed to be separated so that they could guarantee the safety of that child. And they would put them under the custody of ORR, Office of Refugee and Resettlement. And so the Border Patrol was forced to keep those children until they hand them over to the right group of people who was ORR. And ORR was not prepared to handle that high number of children. They needed a place up to code to keep children and process them and help them connect with their immediate sponsors. And so Border Patrol was forced to keep them under detention in a facility could only hold 300 people at one time because it was just processing them. They had to keep them there longer, weeks. Children. That was back when I started in 2014, when we started to see a new wave of high numbers of immigrants arriving to our country. in 2014. And the families then were released. They were released from custody because there was really no room to keep them in detention. And so therefore they give them permission to travel, to continue their travel and get their immigration proceedings for asylum wherever they were going. But they were releasing only those people that fell into a category that it was safe to release them in the United States and they can continue their asylum process. It was what they would later call catch and release, okay? And so a previous administration was calling them catch and release criminals, which was not true. They were actually being processed and they were released because they were asking for asylum. But then the children were kept in detention. So back then, when we got started to respond to these families that were being released to our community, it was our response that we did was when everybody got involved. And why did everybody get involved? It didn't matter whether you were Republican or Democrat, whether you were a city government, county government, everybody was able to come together as one. And what brought us together? Back in the very first day when we started in our response to help these families, it's the community, the families from the church, parishes came together. The city government comes over and walks in and looks at what was happening at the parish hall in Sacred Heart. And they come to me and they said, "Sister, what are you doing here?" And I looked at this man. He was the city manager of back then. And I turned back and I looked at everybody in the parish hall. It was packed. Children and families, and then families from the community helping families of immigrants. And it was incredible what I was looking at what was going on. You know, it was packed. It was late at night. And everybody was either giving food or clothing or whatever the families were needing and helping them. And I turned back and looked at this man and I said, "Restoring human dignity? That's what we're doing?" Well, this man did not expect that answer, you know. He took a step back and he thought about it, and then he comes back to me and says, "Sister, if I had a magic wand, what would that magic wand do for you?" Showers? Because, you know, parish halls don't have showers, you know, only have restrooms and a kitchen. We were cleaning people with wipes and a sink, and as best as we could, remove all the dirt and mud and everything they had on, you know. After people that travel for weeks without ever taking a bath or anything like that, sleeping in the grounds and terrible conditions. That evening, we had a mobile unit of 8 showers. And the next day, the mayor of the city said, "Anything and everything Sister Norma needs, you make sure she has." So we came into partnership. What we were doing did not go against what they stood for. The county government stepped up. The Border Patrol stepped up and says, "We also defend the dignity of the person, sister. How can we help?" We were able to come together as one, everybody. McAllen, Texas, the Rio Grande Valley actually became a model to working together as one. When we stood for one thing that we all of us believe in, human dignity. Nobody can go against that. We must all defend life, because we're all a brother or a sister, a mother or a father, and that's who we have before us. Families, people who are here searching for a chance in life. They're not criminals. I've seen dads hold children that are crying. They're not even their children, consoling them and crying themselves, trying to help this child feel better because they haven't seen their dad in a long time. I've held grandmothers in tears because their little girl, granddaughter, was taken away from her hands because she was not the mother. What is happening to our world when we see so much abuse of people that destroy life with no respect at all to the sacredness of why God gives us life? And yet they come to our country and we continue to do the same, or sometimes even worse. Policies that we put in place that send people back to Mexico because that's the best way to keep them out of here. And in Mexico, they suffer tremendously. It's a country that is very poor. And there's a lot of abuse of organized crime. So we're constantly having to figure out not only if I have enough water or food, but also how to protect myself from my children being taken by organized crime. So these are the realities we face today. We also face the abuses of violence and racism and so many things that destroy life and does not respect human life. So our question is, how do we become that presence in our society today that makes a difference? How do we become those instruments of peace that one day we said yes to? I believe that it's all centers in one thing. Kindness. This is what our Holy Father Francis has constantly been repeated time after time again. Revolutionize tenderness. Do you know what that really means? Revolutionize. Become a rebel in doing good, in being tender. It's going above and beyond so that it can shine as a presence on top of all the ugliness that we see today in our world, all the hatred and violence and madness. We can only do it with kindness, with care, because it has to come from within, from that love that we have inside of us that is put there by God. It is His love that will radiate out and will help us to be able to go to bed tired doing good. Sometimes they tell me, "Sister, how many times have you come to Reynosa to go across to the other side?" And no matter how many people come and ask me, "Will you take me across?" Groups of people, persons that come from up north, and I say, "Yes, I'll take you. Even if I have to go back 2 or 3 times a day, I will go." It's not an easy trip to go across because I go walking. I park in the U.S. side and walk across, and then the sun is terrible. But I don't mind Because I know taking this person across to see the faces of the immigrants that I see up close, that experience will help them, that encounter will help them truly understand and know that there is something that must be done, that we can do. Recently, I had somebody from Georgetown, a dean of Georgetown, as I was speaking with him and his wife when I was in Georgetown sometime in May, and invited him to come down to South Texas, and he came. And I took him to Mexico. And he said, "Sister, this changes everything. I see most of this in the news, but seeing their faces up close, that look in their face, how lost they are in their pain, it changes everything for me. Everyone must see this so that we can make a difference in what we can do to help change this." So we must be okay with going to bed tired. And that's what our Holy Father also said once. Go to bed tired at night, doing good. Some people ask me, "How is it that you do it, sister? You keep going and going, like the Energizer Bunny, it goes and goes and goes." I get tired. I do. We have so many Haitians right now in Reynosa, and they reached a point where they can't go on. The heat and the heart conditions, they were just terrible. That sun, I keep saying, it's so merciless, how it just pulls all your energy and everything. And I was out there with them. They all wanted to talk and understand what's happening. How come we're not able to go into the United States? And they were very upset, and they wanted to talk. And the pastor, Pastor Silva, said, "Sister, help me out. Let's talk to them." So I was out there with them, and we were just sweating. Literally, my shirt was wet, my hair was all wet. I was just drenched in sweat. And they're all there in front of me. Talk about thousands of Haitians right there, and the two of us, and they're all around us. And he said, "Don't you feel it?" He said, don't you feel the heat?" And I said, "Yes, I do. I really do. But you matter to me. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm listening to you. Because I know that it's not easy for you to be here. If it was up to me, maybe I've already crushed you with me back to the United States, but I can't." So what we do matter. And I think to become instruments of peace, I think what matters more is our presence. Our presence amongst them who feel lost, who feel abandoned, who feel rejected, who feel they're indifferent, they invisible. It's almost as if the world goes on and we don't notice them. I once wrote something about a homeless person that we see all the time, sometimes in the streets, sitting down, and this lady always was like, every time I go to Reynosa, this lady was always there in the floor, all dirty, how homeless are. And everybody comes and goes, almost as if she didn't exist. I feel that there's certain people in our society, I think, Our Holy Father refers to them as those in the peripheries, you know. I think peripheries are way out there, but sometimes those peripheries are right here too, you know. Peripheries of our life that we just simply don't really see. These folks are there, yet we don't see them. And sometimes they're immigrants, but they could also be the homeless or somebody else in our community. There's somehow we miss because we're so tied up with our busy lives that we don't quite have time for them. Our busy schedules, you know. I guess something like the Samaritan, you know, the Good Samaritan, that each one had their own business to take care of. And so at the end, nobody really sees the need of somebody that we pass by along the road. I stopped to talk to that lady once to see if I could help her. And she quite didn't, was all there because I said, here, I want to give you this $20 bill. And she said, I don't want it. I said, okay, you don't want it? You know what I'm giving you? A $20 bill, you know? And she said, I want chicken. Okay, well, let me go get you some chicken. But, you know, it's when you stop and ask, tell me, why is it that you're here? Don't you have family? Where's your family? I think that is what we're called to try to do. Care about who they are and why they're there. And be present. I always say that sometimes we want to do, and be so, that's how we feel we've accomplished something. I don't know that we always have to do, but we always need to be present to the other, to that person before us that all they need is for us to show that we care, that they matter, that we're willing to listen. Listen with compassion. So presence has to do a lot with that openness to listen with compassion and to be there by their side, whether it is to cry or to laugh. Sometimes not with very much other than because we don't have all the answers. I remember that first day when the children were being separated and kept in detention by Border Patrol. I always say this story because that is the one experience that I had when I started to do this, responding to the immigrants at the border in 2014. I asked permission to go into that detention facility where the children were. Boy, was that the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life. Go into a detention facility where all they had was kids. In cells, I was standing there with some agents, some officers, and every cell had a big window of glass so they could see inside what was going on. They were all kids, little ones, 5, 10 years old. In detention for not one day, not 1 week, a long time, waiting to come up with an up-to-code facility to send those kids. And I said, what is this? So I asked to go inside and be with the children. And they said, no, sister, you can't go in there. I said, I want to pray with them. Of course, you say no to a nun that wants to pray, right? So I managed to get myself, we're very savvy, right, sister? We get our way. Yes, but getting in there to that one cell with hundreds of children all around me, all looking up to me with faces full of tears, pulling my dress and telling me, sácame de aquí, please get me out of here. Every time I say that, I'm there with them, all crying. I cry with them. That encounter is right here. I promised myself that I would do my part. That was wrong for them to be there. Help me understand, whatever it is, a day will not go by with me saying, I'm too tired, or I already did enough. If there's someone I can do something for, I will. That's my commitment to those kids that I saw that day. That keeps me grounded with my yes that I gave God one day when I say yes and I joined religious life. That is who we are as religious. Women committed, men committed to saying yes to a God that promised us that whatever it is that we do, it will be to build the kingdom of God. Isn't that true, sister? So, some time back, some sisters invited me to at Long Island to speak to other religious. And I told them, don't think I've done enough. There must be something else God has you here for. So most of the sisters there were maybe in their 80s and 90s, you know. And afterwards, the superior, the person responsible for the sisters, I think, she comes up to me and she says, Sister Norma, after you spoke, I had Sister Agnes come in. She's 92 years old. She said, you have to tell me what else can I do, you know? Sister Norma told me we still have something to do. He said, yes, we do. We always have something to do. Yeah. So I think that we can become those instruments of peace by always being that presence that is not there to point a finger at somebody for what they're doing wrong, but rather what they can do right, what we all can do together, and to be able to build on that presence of love that God is with us and with others, and show that respect to life with everybody, even for those who we don't agree with some things that they do. We must be able to rescue them from wherever they're falling into that has them so lost that they destroy life in the way they do. We must do it with love. I don't know that there's any other way but through the love of God in us that can allow us to love others unconditionally. Don't you all agree? Yes? Well, let's go ahead and do our job and continue to love others and be that presence, those instruments of peace in our world today that we most needed. Thank you. I want to invite you to ask me questions. If you have any questions for me, I would be happy to answer. That way we can focus on something that you really want to know. Like what's going on at the border today, right? Any questions? Yes. No, I was not involved. And let me explain. When the whole buses started to move from Texas, the governor, to D.C. and then to New York, and now most recently the governor of Florida started to figure out how to send buses to Martha's Vineyard. When it all started, honestly, it's a political game that they have. And so they're using the families as a way to try to make a point that is not exist, a crisis that was not really in existence. They simply are trying to say that the new administration is actually has the border out of control and everybody's entering, and so that's not true, okay? When the buses started to come up north, the governor approached me. He sent somebody to talk to me and said, we would like for you to give us people so we can send them to DC. And then I said, I can understand you wanting to do that to help us out, because that was the intent that he said he was doing it for. We only have 10 people, and you want me to send 50, give you 50 because we were overwhelmed? That's not true. We're not. Why don't you wait until we have the numbers we had at one point, that we had 2,000 people, I would gladly give you 1,000 of them or more, you know? But no, no matter how many you have, we just want to send people over there, you know? Even if it's 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't matter. So we didn't participate because we told him that it was a political stunt and we're not going to use people. It's a disrespect to the people, you know? So we did not. So he turned to the Border Patrol in other cities that did not have a place like us where we received them. They just hand them over to the governor, put them in a bus, and they took them to DC and then New York or whatever. And so they do promise them things to the immigrants so they could sign a paper that says, you're going to this place, sign this paper, and there you're going to get help, you're going to get everything you need, which is not true. They just did it without truly agreeing that that was going to happen. So unfortunately, politicians use that. They're using immigrants as a political pawn, you know, to benefit their campaign or whatever they want to try to put. But the border right now, honestly, is closed, okay? It hasn't changed. Previous administration closed it because of the pandemic, used the pandemic as a means to close the border, and that's what they call Title 42. This administration has not lifted Title 42 out of fear that if they do, they'll have an out-of-control border, and which is true. But then again, the court system decided that, no, you cannot remove Title 42. So they didn't even have to try to remove it or not remove it because the court decided for them that it was not going to be removed. And maybe they may be right that not to remove it because if you remove Title 42, which is what was put in place using the pandemic to shut down the border, when you remove it, it will be out of control because there's thousands of them waiting on the other side wanting to enter. And so unless you put something in its place to control a proper entrance into the United States, it will be out of control. And so right now, there is what they call exemptions to Title 42 that they started to do in case Title 42 was lifted, to be prepared to manage. And so people are entering the United States in a very limited control way. But it's not a policy, it's just simply a procedure that they started. Nothing will guarantee that that will remain in place. Title 42 gets lifted. There's nothing in place to help people enter the United States legally, safely, orderly, in a way so they can proceed to ask for asylum. And so those are the problems that the administration right now faces and should be able to establish, but they're not working on anything because of this back and forth with politics, you know? They're not finding solutions to the reality we're facing at the border, you know? So right now, almost everybody they can is sent back home to their country, deported back to their country. There's so many flights packed of people that are entering the United States that are sent back to their country if they can. Those that cannot, like people from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Nicaragua, where the United States is not in agreement with, they have a right to be in the United States, so they cannot deport. And so those are the ones we're seeing today in the United States, not anybody else, okay? I don't know if this answers your question, but yes.
I just want to make sure that I understood you correctly. Whoa.
Loud and clear.
I think what I heard you say is the people who were sent on buses to places like Chicago, New York, Martha's Vineyard, were actually taken from the Mexico side of the border?
No, not at all. No, they entered the United States Border Patrol processed them and released them to the governor's buses, okay?
Okay.
In areas where there's not a place like ours, where we receive them ourselves, for Del Rio, for example, or one of those little cities where there's no presence of NGOs or shelters and stuff.
How many places are like that, Sister Norma?
It's hard to say. It's not that many, but in Texas there may be like 3 of them. But
so,
now it's not. Now we're having people from El Laredo, from Arizona, also responding to the buses because they're seeing a great number of people in those areas and they don't have the capacity to deal with it. Now they do need the buses, but they should have the right way to do it. If you're going to send a bus to another city, you notify those leaders, those city managers, or wherever in those areas, and notify them, we're sending a bus to you. Are you prepared? These are the folks we're sending. There's a right and wrong way to do this. They're not really cooperating with those cities and letting them know what they're doing. You know?
Yes. One of my sisters works at Bethany House in Chicago, which receives women and children. And they've recently had a large number of women show up. And the kindness that has happened along the way, some women were dropped off on the street and a police officer found them, bought them new clothes, and brought them to Bethany House. And you told the story about how you're working with Border Patrol. That narrative never breaks through in our media.
It's true. It's
So I
true.
don't
They
know if
only
you have
see the
anything to
wrong
say about
side
that.
of Border Patrol. You know, one of the nicest thing that has happened about the buses, even Martin Vineyard, when they send those people, is the response of the community has been amazing, okay? Thank you to the faith of those in those places have reached out and received the families and done their very best, even before, without even being told, you're getting these people, and they have responded beautifully. So I think, if anything, when I had a delegation from New York come to see me to say, what do we do with them? Well, how do we best help them? They said, well, the best thing about these buses is the fact that you're here asking, you know, because I'm glad the United States has stepped up and said, yes, we can help. How can we do that? And so I think that is something beautiful in response to what the governors are doing, you know. And honestly, I've seen Border Patrol agents and law enforcement respond in a very humane, caring way. You know, it's amazing that they're good men and women. There are exceptions, like there are exceptions in everyone, you know. But that doesn't mean that all of them are bad, you know.
Sister Norma, thank you for your fine work. I appreciate you so much, and I have had the opportunity to serve in McAllen with one of our sisters on 3 separate occasions, and I saw humanity, and I gained way more than I could ever have given. What I wanted to ask you is, when I see this being politicized, I see Christian nationalism, which I abhor. And how do we move the needle from that to Catholic social teaching and works of mercy?
You're asking me, how do we move the needle?
Yeah, because I would like to see it move from that, but all I see now is...
I wish I could too. You know, a bishop was visiting recently at the center from the United Methodist Church and with his delegates of pastors, and he asked me that question, what do we do, sister, because half of our congregation, they're Christians, and yet they're against helping immigrants and what we're trying to do with these families and respond in a loving, caring way. And I said, well, I don't know what Bible they read, you know, because my Bible really, truly tells me to love our brothers and sisters, you know, and so what can I say, you know? They must be, I don't know what is happening for them to be so against human life, you know. Why would they be against? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. You know, how can you convince somebody who is definitely blind to want it to see, you know? You don't want to see, how can you make them see, you know? I think just continue doing what you know is right with those that follow and join you in doing so, you know? And hopefully at some point, somehow, they will see different, you know? I think that's how we move the needle, you know? I find that having somebody speak up and share their stories, I think the stories of the many immigrants that are here already in the United States, we must give them a voice so that they can speak up and share who they are, because sometimes the media really misguides us to believe things that they're not, you know? So maybe that may help a lot. Yes.
Sister Norma, you mentioned a little bit your sense of hope for religious life, and since I work for the Religious Vocation Conference, I can't help but ask you to just expand a little bit on that.
My hope for religious life. Well, I think that God is the one in charge, you know? He's the one that leads us and help us understand what our role is, and to stay connected to that, you know, to stay connected to God, so God can truly continue to open the horizon as to what our role is today. You know, I think today young women are so eager to be connected to something good, you know, and something that is meaningful in their life. Let's do that. Let's not try to stick to what religious life has been in the past, but what religious life is today, you know, who we are as women committed and consecrated to God, and what does that mean, you know?
Thank you. I have two questions, and they're both, I've been debating which one to ask.
Both of them.
All right. The first one is, you know, your witness and your faith. What's your relationship been with your family, like growing up? Were there role models that helped ground you in this direction? Maybe I'll start there and then ask the second one.
My family. Well, I've had good families. My mother, my grandmother. I can remember my grandmother always kneeling down before her bed before she went to sleep and praying, and my mother too. And so, but I don't know, you know, when I entered religious life, my dad told me, he said, Norma, we're not even that Catholic for you to enter religious life, you know? So, you know, I don't know, you know, I think God had to do everything, the fact that I decided to enter religious life. I say, I better get this one on this side, because if she goes that way, she's probably going to mess up, you know. So, I don't know, I'm just a very, I take risks in life, you know, I've always had, you know, and so entering religious life was like entering something that really was something that, you know, let me just share my little story, how I've said this sometimes, how it is that I decided to enter religious life. You know, I'm an artist. I got to have a Bachelor's in Fine Arts, and I was really looking forward to moving on and doing my professional career, where I was, you know, really gung-ho to go out there and conquer the world. That was my thoughts, and my dad was totally against that. He said, no, Norma, you're staying home. You're gonna stay here and until the day you get married, you know? And I said, oh boy. So I had to figure out a way to get out of the house. And so I said, we go back to school, Norma, that's the best way. So I went and I signed up to go to school again and in university. And in the meantime, I was waiting at home. I'm not gonna do anything to mess up. My dad decided at the last minute, you're not leaving, you know? So I was not even going out with my friends or anything like that. And one day I was so tired, just being home, not doing anything. Called this friend of mine, who my dad likes a lot, because she was very church going, you know. And so I said, Linda, what are you doing tonight? And she said, we're going to a prayer group. I go, what are you doing after the prayer group? And she said, we're going to Pizza Hut. Perfect, pick me up after the prayer group. I love pizza, you know, that's how God got me, pizza. And so she said, Norma, you have to come to the prayer group, because we can't go to the prayer group, come back for you, and then go back to the Pizza Hut. So you're stuck, you have to come to the prayer group. So I went, you know, And she figured, she said, just sit in the back, and before you know it, it's over, and we'll go to Pizza Hut. So we ended up going I sat there at the prayer group. It was during the charismatic movement. I don't know if you know what that meant, but I just started seeing all these people raise their hand, clap their hands, spill their guts out of everything bad they ever done in their life, I was like, oh my God. And then at the end of the prayer group, they made a circle of chairs, and they said, anyone that would like for us to pray for you, sit in the circle. So Linda said, Norma, sit in the circle. She figured she knew what was going on with my dad. So I sat in the circle. And all these old ladies that were there, they pray for you, and they put their hands everywhere, and everybody, they pray for us. And I had a headache, honestly. That day I've been like always stressed because with my dad and things. And so my headache went away, And then I noticed something different in me. I felt something different. I couldn't really explain, but I felt good. I liked what I was feeling, and I just felt drawn to continue going to the prayer group, Something changed in me. I was so hungry to know God, to read about God, and to just, my life changed from that night on. And so much so that my mom said, are you going to become a nun or what? And I said, what if I am? And I did. And a year after that, I just joined because everything changed for me. And that's how I entered religious life. My life changed because God wanted me to be in this direction. Your next question?
That was beautiful. Okay, so switching back, with the United Catholic Conference of Bishops in this country, have you had any connection with them or dialogue with them? Because there's always an intersection of people crossing the border are Catholic, and that should cause some dissonance for a lot of Catholics who are still saying border closed. Well, these are human people. They're celebrating within our church. Does that, have you, and I just don't know what the support is from USCCB.
I belong to several committees for the Bishops' Conference. I actually will be going. I was just we do a lot of Zoom meetings, and one of that I belong to is on racism, and the other one's in immigration. And so, for the most part, bishops are very wanting to be knowing what their response needs to be, But they are bishops, and you have to wait and let them move along as they think they need to, right? But they're open. They're open to the thoughts of what must we do as church. And I think that for the most part, most of them are. There are exceptions, like there are exceptions in everything, right? But yes. Any questions somewhere? Yes.
What can women religious be doing to help these people that are coming in on the buses? I mean, we have these buildings that are sitting empty that we're selling. And if you're in these, I mean, we're in New York and DC, and so we're a little better set up for the infrastructure for these people coming in. But if you're in a small town and there's no place for these people to go except maybe this big convent that it's in the middle, are there women religious taking action, or is there a way we could be taking more action to kind of utilize our space and our talent and our experience for these people?
I know people are taking action. I don't know that who exactly. Sometimes Catholic Charities in those areas are taking action. They've called me and asked me to give them best practices and how to best respond. But so many people are responding. And I'm trying to, one of the things I tell them is this, these people, the families that are arriving, or whoever's arriving to your city, I think it's important that you define for yourself what you think is the immediate need that you must give to these families. But you must also not try to overdo what you're doing, because limited to only the most essential things that person needs at the present time, so that you can empower them to do for themselves. Otherwise, you give them a false expectations of what they're capable of doing for themselves. So I say, don't rob them of their dignity. to be able to do for themselves. So, but help them in that movement forward, not like, oh, right away, I'm gonna take care of you, and then eventually you'll get tired. And so I said, organize the response by making sure those people that are stepping up to help you in those cities, define how they can help so that way they can help you for as long as possible, because this is not going to go away just right now. It's going to last a while. I thought when I started, when I borrowed the parish hall from Father Tom back in 2014, I said, can I borrow your parish hall for a couple of days, Father? Well, let me tell you, 3 years later, I was still there, And so you need to consider the fact that the people that are stepping up and saying, I want to help you in that city, work together and define for yourselves what are the things that you must do that the people need immediately, and just don't go overboard trying to give everything possible, but let them take care of themselves. I think that, and so any religious group, I'm sure many of them may be already helping, but if not, join those that are already doing something and see if they already have a plan as to what are the things that are critical for them to respond immediately, and limit yourself to that. Yes.
I'm thinking that if you're going to help to bring the immigrants to your community, that one of the first things that you need to do is to remove the fear of the other. Mm-hmm. How can our congregations engage with the community to help remove that fear of the other, to help to combat the racism and fear of immigration? How do we reach out to the immediate area?
Yes, it's true that one of the obstacles, one of the things that paralyzes us is because we hear so many negative, false narratives about who the immigrants are, that people are living fear of the immigrants, and they think they're criminals and they're here to hurt us, and they're afraid of the unknown. And so personally, like one example that I have, one lady once came to our center and said, Sister, I'm 100% against what you're doing, helping these illegal aliens. And so I told her, thank you for telling me. Let me show you what I do and why. And I introduced her to the families, the mothers and the children, and explained to them what was happening. She turned around and said, I'm 100% in favor of what you're doing. 100%. That evening, her husband calls me and he says, I don't know what you did to my wife, but she came home today after work, and she said, if sister ever calls you, you make sure you do whatever she asks. So I'm calling to put myself in your, let you know that I'm here to help if you need me, Why? Because she was able to see. When you're able to come and see up close, you will be able to understand and feel and then begin to act correctly. I think that those that are fear, they need to be able to be introduced to the truth of what really is happening, who they are. They have a false understanding of who the immigrants are. They need to know the truth, I think.
As I hear you talking about the visits of people to come and see the immigrants in your space, the thing I worry about when we're talking of places where there's very few is the people who are undocumented, who are willing to be that person who helps create a face. What sort of precaution do you take, or would we need to take, to ensure, one, that we're not tokenizing them, and two, that we're not putting them in danger of having somebody call and report them rather than coming away moved and changed like they experienced with you, and instead calling ICE and having people sent away?
Yeah, well, every immigrant that is in here, I would say, as little as we're working, the ones that are being bused, they have permission to be in the United States. They're not illegal. They're actually legally in the United States, temporarily, but they're legally. And so, but it is good what you say about being respectful to them, to make sure that you're not doing anything that will put them in danger, because there are a lot of people that hate them, just because they're immigrants, right? And so you put them in harm's way by exposing them if they don't want that, you know. So they have to make that decision themselves. You have to ask them, would you be okay? A lot of them also do not want to be coming out on the media because it could endanger their families back home, you know. And so I think taking those precautions and being careful about what's okay for them and what's not, you know, and especially if you're going to bring them to meet a group, it would be people that you feel comfortable will respect them and not be there to harm them, you know. Today, we don't know that so much, you know, who they are, who's in the audience, unless it's an audience like this that everybody's obviously believe in what we're doing, you know. But if it's an open group that you don't know who's in the audience, you have to know who's entering your area before you introduce a family to them, because they could harm them, and you're right. Yes. Any questions? No? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again, Sister Norma. You are an inspiration to all of us, and we are so glad you were here with us today. For those of you who may not know, she actually was planning to speak with us in 2020 in San Diego, and Rob worked with her then, years ago, to try and have her, and then unfortunately we were unable to be in person, so she's been on the books for 2 years now, and we are so grateful that this was able to happen. And she also was telling me earlier that she's had some calls and people asking for her to come today, or to be somewhere else today, and she kept her commitment here, so we are so appreciative. Thanks again.